Hi, this is Jarvis DeBerry, columnist for NOLA.com and the Times-Picayune. I'm here today with Constance and Ned Sublette, the authors of The American Slave Coast, A History of Slave-Breeding Industry. I want to first welcome you all to New Orleans and welcome you here to NOLA.com. I know you've been on a book tour about your new book. Can you tell us first why you all decided to call this book The American Slave Coast?
Sure. Various regions of Africa were known for their exports and were called by the Europeans the Ivory Coast, the Gold Coast, and the Slave Coast, which was a stretch that includes present-day what was subsequently known as Dahomey.
Yeah.
The eastern United States, the Chesapeake region, Virginia, and Maryland exported a tremendous number of domestically born slaves to the South, both by coffle overland and ocean-going ships that went around Florida and to New Orleans. More slave ships came to New Orleans from the east coast of the U.S. than from Africa.
That's not our concept of this great country of ours. You know, this is supposed to be the manufacturer of liberty and freedom, but you're saying that it was actually a slave coast.
For many people, freedom meant the freedom to own slaves. And yeah, some people have called Virginia, the Chesapeake area, the Tobacco Coast, but it would be equally appropriate to call it the American Slave Coast.
You talk a lot in your book about breeding and how that came to be a significant part of the slave trade. Why should people be more alarmed at that notion than just the idea of human beings being forced to pick some crop or another?
It was the idea that the birth, breeding, raising of children born into slavery was as much of an industry and a productive industry economically as the products that their labor created, whether cotton, rice, indigo, tobacco.
Wow. One of the things I found more fascinating than most of the things you have in your book is the idea that I think slaves in Virginia tended to survive longer, say, than those who were enslaved in South Carolina and Louisiana. So the market price for people in Virginia wanted to cut off the importation of slaves from Africa, in large part because it would increase the value of the property they own. And Thomas Jefferson figures pretty large in that particular thing. You want to speak about Jefferson in particular?
It was a unique situation in the hemisphere. Everywhere else in the hemisphere where they were growing sugar, the enslaved died off after 8 to 10 years and were replaced by fresh arrivals from Africa. But for a variety of reasons in Virginia, doing the relatively milder work of tobacco with better food, fewer tropical diseases, and closer to gender parity, other reasons, the enslaved didn't die off, but increased. This is already happening in the 18th century, in the 17th century. So that in Virginia and Maryland, the conditions existed to have a slave breeding industry.
And it's more favorable for them, profit-wise, to cut off the importation of slaves from Africa. And then, as you point out, Jefferson as president doubles the size of the country, and therefore that human property becomes even more valuable.
That's right, because also Virginia land was being played out for tobacco by the time of the Declaration of Independence. So Virginian slave owners had what they thought of as surplus labor, which they also saw as their capital assets. How were they to monetize their assets? By selling people to the new territories. Louisiana coming online was a bonanza for them. One of the major conflicts in the book is Virginia, the great slave breeder, versus South Carolina, the great slave importer. This gets duked out at the Constitutional Convention, and ultimately, on January 1st, 1808, the earliest constitutionally permissible date, President Thomas Jefferson, who very proactively worked to have this happen, signs the prohibition of the African slave trade to the United States, which is protectionism. It was not a humanitarian gesture. It was not, I mean, ending slavery would have been a humanitarian act, but ending the African slave trade was a protectionist measure on behalf of Virginia slave owners who saw the value of their property go up. And that included Thomas Jefferson.
Let me ask you, Ms. Constance, you said earlier that you were confronted by some people years ago who said that the Civil War was not about slavery. You know, we've been having a battle in New Orleans about Confederate monuments, and that always comes up, that the war really wasn't about slavery. You know, why do you think such mythology persists even to this day? Do you hope that your book might correct some of that?
That's a driving force for writing this book, actually, is to hopefully help change the dialogue about the mythology of the Civil War, particularly about it not being about slavery. Because when I was confronted with this accusation by various people that the war was not about slavery, I was very surprised, because I always learned from the 4th grade on that it was about slavery. We had a war, we fixed it, okay. But I began to doubt myself. And so I went digging into history, and the more I learned, all I could find is that the forces driving secession and the Civil War were all about the expansion of slavery. It was not only about having this system of slavery, but to expand it further into the United States, its territories, and perhaps in dreams in the future, South America.
Let me ask you all about New Orleans and how it factors into this book, because I'm sure a lot of people in New Orleans want to know, what role did New Orleans play in this slave breeding industry?
New Orleans was the great market, the #1 market for the industry.
The #1 market?
The #1 market. The highest price market was Natchez, up the river, which was the very end of the distribution chain. But New Orleans is where, how much of this city, around Gravier Street and down around Esplanade, how much of this city was given over to dealer showrooms, to slave jails.
So you're talking showrooms like we were talking about showrooms for cars?
Yeah, basically. Sometimes people were sent out onto the street to stand out on the street and solicit people to buy them, and spend all day doing that and then put up at night.
Talk about the audiences you've met in New Orleans and how they've responded thus far. You were at Community Book Center last night, you were at Tulane University before that, and you were at Octavia Books, I believe, at Friday or Thursday, November
Thursday at 6 at Octavia.
Okay. What's the reception then?
Go ahead.
It has been extraordinary, and we are so grateful and so humbled. It's been nothing but love, and also very vibrant, exciting conversations and the questions and answers. And afterwards, when we are signing books, people have so much to say, so much to ask. And most of all, for me, as you can tell from the cover of the book, this book is about women. The weight of all of this fell upon their wombs. This is the slave breeding industry, this capitalist system. It was on them to expand it as fast as possible, as often as possible, to bring children into the world. And when women have come up to me afterwards to talk about the book, it is so wonderful that they feel this, that it's about them.
Well, thank you all for being here, and thank you for joining me today. This is Jarvis DeBerry with NOLA.com. Thank you.